I found the jacket first. It was slung carelessly over the arm of our living room chair, a faded forest green bomber with a tear under the right sleeve that had been clumsily sewn shut. I'd seen it before, 2 years earlier, in a photo she once posted and deleted. A photo of her and Nate, sitting close at a concert, his arm around her, that same tear barely visible where his elbow bent. She claimed they were just friends by then. I didn't argue. I remembered the way she said it, offhanded, almost amused that I'd even notice. I hung the jacket by the door, didn't say a word. Next came the key fob. It was wedged between the couch cushions when I vacuumed on Saturday. Black plastic, unfamiliar emblem, a rental car. I pressed the unlock button and heard the distant chirp from the driveway. I hadn't seen her drive anything new, and I hadn't rented anything myself. When I asked her, careful, casual, without a trace of accusation, she smiled without looking up from her laptop. "Oh, that must be from a client," she said. "One of the guys I'm mentoring is in town. He probably dropped it." I nodded slowly, holding her gaze for a second longer than usual. That night she told me she had a Zoom call and needed quiet. She went upstairs, shut the bedroom door behind her. 15 minutes later I heard the laugh. Male, familiar, confident. Muffled but unmistakable, it came through the vents like steam from a cracked pipe. I climbed halfway up the stairs and stopped. Not because I was afraid, I stopped because something in me knew that from this point on everything would be different, not worse, not better, just permanently different. I knocked once, calmly. She opened the door a few inches, framed in the light from the vanity mirror behind her. Her expression didn't change. "Why is he here?" I asked. She blinked, then scoffed softly like the question itself was absurd. "You're being controlling again." That word again. Not wrong, not paranoid, not mistaken, controlling. It wasn't a denial. It was a redirect, a game of linguistic judo. If I reacted, I'd prove her point. If I stayed calm, I'd appear guilty, emotionally detached, cold, unfeeling. So I nodded. Didn't say another word. Walked back downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I didn't eat dinner that night. She didn't ask why. The next morning I noticed the guest bathroom smelled different. Sharp, musky. Not mine. The toothbrush by the sink had been rotated, the bristles flattened slightly like it had been recently used and dried fast. She said nothing about the night before. Asked if I wanted eggs. I said sure. And in that moment, cracking shells, sprinkling pepper, sliding toast onto a plate like any other day, I realized something important. I didn't need to confront her. I just needed to pay attention. The receipt was a mistake. Not hers, Uber's. It had been emailed to our shared account, the one she forgot to disconnect when she started separating personal and business expenses. I didn't check it often. But that morning, as she hummed in the shower and I sat at the table sipping coffee that tasted like ash, I opened the inbox. 3:17 a.m. drop-off. Pickup, Midtown, drop-off, our street. Passenger, her. She told me she went to a late yoga class the night before. "Hot stretch at Elevate," she said, towel slung around her neck, sweat still glistening on her collarbone. She kissed my forehead on the way to the fridge. Yoga ended at 9:30. The timestamp said otherwise. I didn't say anything. I archived the email and started a new folder. Not on the computer, that's traceable. I started printing. That night I kissed her like usual, said goodnight like usual. She smiled, curled into my side, and fell asleep faster than I did. I stayed awake, counting her breaths. They were slow, steady. Falsehoods don't breathe like that. Only certainty does. The next week I noticed the invoices. She was working on rebranding, she said. Her coaching business was evolving. New vision, new mission statement, new visuals. She talked about alignment like it was oxygen, necessary, urgent, spiritual. I asked who was helping her. She paused mid-keystroke just long enough for me to notice. "Nate," she said casually, like saying the name of an old classmate. "He's a designer now. It's just part-time." "And he's billing through his agency?" I asked, tapping the printout lightly. The invoice sat between us on the counter, her name and his name on separate lines, but tied together through company letterhead and vague service descriptions. Creative consultation, strategy session, digital asset package. She raised her eyes, slow and deliberate. "You're looking through my things now?" I smiled politely. "It was on the printer tray, thought it was mine." She pulled the paper toward her, folded it once, and tucked it into her notebook. "You don't trust me," she said, softer now. "That's going to be a problem." There it was again, the shift, not defense, accusation. She decrossed a line and dared me to notice. And when I did, the conversation became about my tone, my boundaries, my alleged insecurity. I watched her walk away, notebook pressed tight to her chest like it was fragile or full of things she couldn't let me see. I wasn't digging. I hadn't touched a single password, a single device. I just stood still. Let the truth collect itself. Patterns always do. I called my accountant that afternoon. Asked him to separate all personal contributions I'd made to her business over the past year, joint funds, shared credit usage, household overhead. I told him I was preparing for a possible audit. That wasn't a lie. By the time she left for her networking mixer that Thursday, I'd already collected copies of 3 contracts, all signed by her, all funneled through Nate's LLC. I sat alone in our living room, jacket still on the door hook, staring at my name, not hers, on the lease to a condo she'd invited someone else into. She didn't just cross a line. She redrew it, called it partnership, and told me to be grateful. She called it co-creating trust. The phrase came out of her mouth as she poured almond milk into a glass like it was normal, like using my savings to pay her ex-boyfriend's agency fees was just a shared dream taking form. I didn't respond. Not with words. I watched the milk swirl at the bottom of the glass, then settle. She set it in front of me with a warm smile, her hand brushing mine like we were still on the same side of this. Nate's just helping with aesthetics, she said. You know I'm not great with visuals. I looked at the invoice again. $5,000 for vision alignment workshops. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the story. The way she said just helping when it was clearly more. The way she folded her breach of trust into branding, and the way she was now asking if I wanted to promote it on my LinkedIn. He's not involved in the business side, she added quickly, sensing the silence. He's helping me show up more fully. Don't you want me to feel empowered? There it was again, the reframing. I asked why the joint card had a new balance spike last week. She blinked. That was for marketing. You know, launching a personal brand takes upfront investment. I studied her face. Nothing in her tone was panicked. Nothing about her posture gave her away. She was smooth, practiced, as if she'd rehearsed not the lie but the moral argument around it. If I pushed, I'd be against her growth, against healing, against her stepping into visibility. But what I was looking at wasn't empowerment, it was embezzlement by affection. You're quiet, she said, testing my mood. I'm thinking, I replied. She leaned in, voice lower now. I need you to trust me through the process. If we're ever going to scale this dream, you have to let me lead sometimes. I nodded, then changed every password I had. The next 2 weeks I tracked everything. Bank logins, Cash App requests, shared drive activity. She wasn't being sloppy, but the thing about stacking lies is that eventually the architecture can't hold. I noticed subtle shifts, receipts forwarded from new email addresses, calendar invites labeled alignment instead of design, hotel stays passed off as retreat scouting. She crafted falsehoods like a strategist. Soft, subtle, plausible. Meanwhile, our grocery receipts started to include items I didn't eat, spices we never used, wine I hadn't seen. Little things, enough to make me pause. But it wasn't until I found the alternate Dropbox that I truly understood how much of the picture she'd painted was airbrushed. The shared logo files were dated months before she claimed the inspiration struck. Documents showed back and forth notes between her and Nate about brand colors, language, tone, positioning statements, not just business. Language only people in sync or in something deeper. One comment caught my eye, buried in a file labeled Drafts V4. Feels like us, finally. Not feels like the brand. Not feels aligned. Us. I sat back in my chair, the glow from the screen painting my face in ghost light. Not because I was shocked. Not anymore. But because I realized something essential. She wasn't hiding a mistake. She was building a system, and she had bet on me never looking close enough to see the foundation. I wasn't supposed to see the second contract. It came through by accident, a copy from her assistant, CC'd to the wrong address. I'd set up a forward filter months ago to track brand correspondence for tax records. She knew that. Still, the file landed in my inbox at 6:43 a.m. on a Monday. Subject: Final Logo Approval Contract attached. Her name at the top, Nate's at the bottom, and between them a clause I hadn't seen before. One that tied creative rights directly to his agency for 5 years. one that promised profit share if the brand crossed a revenue threshold she'd already passed last quarter. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just about trust anymore. This was leverage. If we split and she fought for the business, he'd own a chunk of it too, legally. Quietly. Preemptively, I scrolled through the chain. The conversation wasn't cold or clinical. There were emojis and jokes, phrases like "we'll protect this together." Not I, not my, we. That night we hosted friends, wine, laughs, talk of launches and retreats and intuitive scaling. She introduced herself as a founder, a visionary, called me her anchor in front of our guests like I was some sacred grounding rod while she floated above the fray. I watched her pour Nate's wine, the vintage I'd bought 6 months ago, into stemless glasses and pass them around like communion. No one noticed the tremble in my hand when I raised mine. I waited until everyone left before I spoke. "Who owns your brand?" She tilted her head, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Legally," I said. "If something happened tomorrow, who would the profits go to?" She looked at me like I'd asked if she believed in gravity. "I do," she said. "It's my name." "Not according to this," I replied, sliding the contract across the island. Her smile faded the way a light dims when the power dips, quick, then lingering. She didn't touch the paper, didn't deny it, didn't explain. Instead, she asked softly, "Are you checking up on me now?" "I'm verifying what I fund," I said. That's when she changed. Not suddenly, but like a door shutting 1 inch at a time. Her shoulders pulled back. Her face settled into something calm, prepared. "You're making this feel transactional," she said. "That's not love." I stared at her, stunned by the irony. "You used our joint account to give equity to your ex." Her lips parted, then closed. She had a retort, I saw it spark, but she let it die. There was no language twist big enough to cover that. I gathered the papers. She watched me do it in silence. I could feel the shift then, a tectonic slide in the way she looked at me. Not with guilt, not with fear, but with calculation. As if weighing how much longer the lie could hold and what it would cost to pivot the story. She wasn't trying to salvage the truth anymore. She was prepping the next version. By the time I traced the second payment, I'd stopped feeling shocked. The first had gone through 6 weeks earlier, a consulting retainer wired to Nate's LLC. The second hit just days ago, routed through a third-party platform she started using to streamline payments. It wasn't about amounts. It was about duplicity, one narrative for me, one for him. Two stories moving in parallel, never meant to collide until now. I printed both receipts, lined them up next to the contract. Her signatures matched, the dates didn't. She debackdated one to make it look like it happened after we aligned on shared goals. But the invoice had already been processed, time-stamped, immutable. I stared at the paperwork for nearly an hour. Not because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but because I did. She wasn't caught up in an old flame. She wasn't confused. She had built a business between two men, one for money, one for meaning, me for stability, him for spotlight. She'd split her life like a spreadsheet. I gave her a week. I needed to be sure, not just of the affair or the finances, but of how far the lie had spread. I checked her brand's domain registry. The IP address matched a location near Nate's studio. A studio she said she'd only visited once or twice. The registry was under her name, but the recovery email was his. She wasn't building alone. She was co-founding a life she didn't invite me into, even as she used my name to fund it. The night before I confronted her, we went to dinner. She wore the earrings I gave her last anniversary, laughed easily, took a picture of the wine glass for her story, tagged it grateful. We looked like any couple celebrating a quiet win, except I knew. And she didn't know I knew. And that made every smile she gave me feel radioactive. When we got home, I asked if she was tired. She said yes. Kissed my cheek, said, "Thanks for tonight, love." I watched her walk upstairs, counted each step like a clock ticking down. Then I printed the final document, a property transfer form I'd never signed, notarized using a forged signature and witnessed by someone I didn't recognize. Dated 2 months ago. She was trying to move partial ownership of the condo into her name. She never filed it. Maybe she hesitated. Maybe the notary backed out, but she had prepared it. And she had done it without telling me. That was my moment, not the breach, not the falsehoods, the paperwork. That's when I crossed the mental line I hadn't let myself approach until now. This wasn't emotional fog. It wasn't confusion. It was strategic construction. She was staging a life I'd never agreed to be part of and giving herself a stake in everything I'd built to keep her comfortable. She didn't want to leave me. She wanted to outgrow me, quietly, efficiently, profitably. I didn't wake her. I left the house at 4:10 a.m., drove to my office, and sat in the dark until sunrise, folder in my lap. No music, no podcasts, just silence, thick, weighted, necessary. At 7:00 a.m., I began making copies. 3 sets. Each contained the following: Nate's invoices, bank transfer logs, domain registry data, the forged property form, the contract with the profit-sharing clause. I labeled one folder with her name, one with mine, and one with the attorney's. She still didn't know what I had, and that gave me power, not revenge, not satisfaction, just clarity, a rare currency when you've spent months being spun in circles. That evening, I set the folder on the dining table before she got home. I didn't say a word. Just left it open, the first page angled toward the door. I sat in the living room and waited, pretending to scroll my phone. She came in, humming, purse swinging from her elbow like always. Then she saw it. She paused mid-step like someone had slipped ice into her shoes. I didn't look up. She stood still for a few seconds. Then slowly she crossed the room. Her fingers hovered over the papers but didn't touch them. The silence stretched. "Where did you get these?" she asked finally. Still, I didn't look at her. "They're all yours." Her breath caught, not audibly but visibly. Her jaw tightened, nostrils flared slightly. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She didn't ask what I wanted. That told me everything. "Let me explain," she started. "You already did," I said, eyes still on the screen. "Through contracts, transfers, invoices." Her voice dropped. "You're making assumptions." I finally met her eyes. "Assumptions don't come with notarized documents." She flinched just a flicker, then straightened, her voice hardened. "You went through my things." "No, you left your story in plain sight. I just paid attention." She stepped back from the table like the folder was radioactive. "This is dramatic." "No," I said quietly, "this is due diligence." She tried one more angle. "You're not thinking about what this does to my brand." "I am," I said, very carefully. Her eyes darted to the papers again. She opened the contract, scanned it, closed it. "You can't use these," she whispered, not looking at me. "They're private." I stood, took the folder from her hands before she could pull it closer. She didn't resist. Then I walked past her up the stairs into the office and locked the drawer I'd cleared for these exact documents. Downstairs, she didn't follow, didn't cry, didn't protest. She sat on the couch and scrolled her phone, pretending to be unbothered. But I watched her thumb hesitate, her jaw lock. Her legs start to bounce the way it always did when she couldn't control the next move. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an audit. And she had failed, not because of one mistake, but because she tried to live 2 lives and forgot that one of them was with someone who actually paid attention. I froze the joint account that night. Not in anger, not in vengeance, in self-defense. I called the bank after she fell asleep in the guest room, the bedroom she used when she needed space to center. Her version of emotional leverage. The unspoken message. "See what you drove me to." I didn't reply, didn't plead. Just transferred all liquid assets into a new account under my name, flagged the joint credit card for pending account review, and revoked her access to the household financial dashboard she never thought I used. By morning, her card was declined at the cafe 2 blocks from our place. She came home with the same quiet fury I'd seen when she lost an argument online, controlled, simmering, practiced. "Did you freeze the accounts?" she asked. I didn't look up from my laptop. "They were compromised." Her face shifted, not to panic, to calculation. "This affects my business," she said, voice sharp. "Clients rely on those funds." "They're not your clients," I replied. "They're ours. You built the foundation on our shared credit. Your brand doesn't exist without joint resources." She stepped closer. "That's not how this works." "No," I said, standing, folder in hand. "This is how it ends." I left before she could respond. My first stop was our legal advisor, the one we'd used when we bought the condo. I handed him the file, watched his expression change as he flipped through each document, his hands stilled at the property form. "She tried to transfer partial title without your consent," he asked quietly. "She prepared to," I said, "didn't file it." "But the intent's clear." He nodded once, then began drafting a motion to block any further claims on shared assets. We filed a formal request for forensic financial review, not to punish, but to protect. That afternoon, I sent a notice to the clients tied to her brand. every one of them whose invoices were paid through our joint household account. The message was polite, neutral, factual. There is an ongoing internal review of company structure and financial representation. As of now, all shared financial endorsements are suspended pending resolution. No accusations, no names, just friction. Her business, once buoyed by glossy slogans and community hashtags, started leaking credibility like a punctured raft. Comments disappeared from her posts. Mentions dried up. One of her retreat sponsors pulled out the same day the email landed. I watched her post a photo of herself smiling at a local park, captioned, "Rebuilding from Truth." The likes came slow. Then the comments. Is it true what they're saying? Didn't you say this was your solo vision? People trusted you. She turned the comments off by midnight. The next morning I noticed her bios had changed. Coach, speaker, founder, gone, now just her name. A few hours later she emailed me. Not a text, not a call. Subject, let's talk, body, we don't have to destroy each other to move forward. I didn't reply. We weren't at war, we were at disclosure. She debuilt her empire with 2 pillars. I removed mine. Now she was learning what her version of independence looked like without the scaffolding she'd quietly borrowed and hoped I'd never notice. I saw the message by accident. A preview on her phone screen when she left it face up in the kitchen, a text from Nate. He's not going to do anything, he never does. It was followed by a laughing emoji and then, this'll pass. It always does. She must have stepped away mid-text, tea brewing, probably. I didn't touch the phone, didn't need to, I already had my answer. She told me once long before this that she believed in dualities, that people could be 2 things at once, vulnerable and powerful, hurt and healing, committed and exploring. At the time I thought it was insight. Now I saw it for what it was. Permission. Not for complexity, but for deception. She'd given herself ideological clearance to live 2 lives, to speak to Nate like I was a footnote, and to speak to me like he was ancient history. Later that week, I found the email she sent to him 2 months prior, buried deep in the shared Dropbox folder, probably forgotten. He's safe, you're real. That line stayed with me longer than I expected, not because I didn't know she'd said it, but because it confirmed the playbook. I wasn't a person anymore. I was coverage, structure, the scaffolding she climbed while selling a different version of herself to someone else. She told me once that the past is the past, said it with conviction. Eyes locked on mine, no tremble in her voice, but the past had a name and a toothbrush in our guest bathroom. I wasn't mad anymore, not the kind of mad that swings or burns. I felt something quieter, sharper, like watching a tide pull out slowly, knowing it was taking something you couldn't recover. She was never going to confess, not fully. Confession requires shame. She preferred framing, that's what she tried next. She posted a black and white photo on her profile, captioned, "Sometimes people feel threatened by strong women. I'm choosing peace over performance." A few of her loyal followers commented hearts. Some echoed support. But buried in the thread was one comment that didn't vanish like the others. Strong women don't lie in shared beds. By morning, the post was gone. But the screenshot was. It had already circulated in the small business group she tried to partner with last month. One of them forwarded it to me, blind copied. No commentary, just the image and a subject line, "You deserve better." That wasn't validation. I didn't need strangers on the internet to tell me what I already knew, but it was proof. That silence speaks louder than branding, and that the truth, once exposed, doesn't need to shout. It just stands still and waits. I didn't leave overnight. That's not how you dismantle a shared life. You don't just walk out, you unravel. First, I listed the condo, quietly. Through a private agent who specialized in discreet transfers, I staged it myself, removed every personal photo, every trace of us, left behind only the design pieces she thought reflected her aesthetic values. Ironic, given how many of those were paid for by Nate's consulting fees. She didn't notice the listing right away, or if she did, she didn't say. Then I transferred the remainder of my savings into a locked trust, pre-walled with legal safeguard. She wasn't on it, couldn't touch it. I left nothing open to debate. After that, I reviewed every shared utility, license, and service we held together. Her name vanished from all of them in a single afternoon. That evening, she came home early, saw the real estate papers on the counter, stopped mid-step like the room had tilted. "You're selling it?" she asked, not angry, not begging, just surprised. "Yes," I said. "It no longer reflects my values." She didn't respond, didn't argue. She just looked at the walls like they were strangers, like the life we built had already gone blurry around the edges. She slept upstairs that night. I stayed on the couch not out of spite but because it was already mine again. She had claimed so much space without asking that this simple, square silence felt like breathing room. A week later, I moved out. I left the condo clean, staged, ready for viewing. No mess, no goodbye note. Just one folder on the counter with everything I legally owed her and nothing more. When she walked back into that space, all she would find was absence. No explanation, no explosion, just the scent of her own audacity echoing through polished floors. She texted later that night, "You didn't have to do this." I stared at the screen, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I did. I typed, "You're right, I chose to." Then I hit send. No ... typing bubble appeared. No follow-up, just stillness. And on the other side of it, for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. Because the worst part wasn't her false story. It was realizing how long I had silenced myself to accommodate it. That era was over. I hadn't escaped. I'd exited. With everything she used to build her illusion now locked down, accounted for, and out of her reach. She didn't go quiet, not right away. After I left, her posts changed tone. Gone were the branding tips and lifestyle reels. In their place came long captions about resilience, reclamation, and recovering from misrepresentation. She never used my name, of course. That would have made it real. But her followers weren't blind. Some reposted old clips, the ones where she called me her partner in purpose. The one where she tagged me beside Nate, pretending the three of us were collaborators, not a love triangle. The archive worked against her. The internet remembered what she'd hoped people would forget. Then came the questions. Is it true he funded your business? Was Nate ever a partner or just a creative friend? Why were you sharing quotes about loyalty while living two lives? She turned off comments again, deleted most of the older videos, but the screenshots kept circulating not publicly but through networks. The quiet circles, the ones she'd tried to leverage for her next launch. Sponsors started pulling out. One brand partnership disappeared from her bio without notice. Her online store went under revision. The narrative had slipped from her control. She rebuilt her identity on being seen as honest, grounded, inspirational. But inspiration doesn't survive when your receipts outnumber your apologies. One day I saw a post she forgot to lock down, just a black screen with white text. I gave everything, and he still walked. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because she still didn't understand. I didn't walk away from what she gave. I walked away from what she withheld: truth, respect, a shared reality. She could spin whatever story she wanted now about victimhood, growth, misalignment, but the data had already spoken. The signatures, the transfer logs, the planning she did behind closed doors while smiling across our dinner table. That story didn't need comments. It lived in documents, in timelines that didn't match, in a toothbrush that rotated when she thought I wasn't paying attention. You can't PR your way out of a paper trail, especially when the other half of the story refuses to play villain. I didn't argue, didn't post, didn't defend myself. I just moved forward and let the silence say what needed to be said. She reached for my arm as I walked past her on the sidewalk. It had been weeks, long enough that I'd stopped anticipating these moments. But there she was outside the building where we once shared a coworking space, dressed like she had somewhere important to be, but standing still like she'd forgotten why she was there. "You can't just leave," she said, fingers brushing my coat. I paused, not because I felt anything, but because she didn't realize how much had already been left behind. I looked at her hand, still hovering, not gripping, then met her eyes. She looked tired, not broken, not devastated, just frayed at the edges. The canvas stretched too many times. "I'm not leaving," I said, lifting the folder I'd brought with me. "I'm taking everything you used to build this lie." Her mouth opened slightly, but I didn't wait for whatever narrative she'd preloaded this time. "I've filed final paperwork," I added. "No claims remain, no debts owed. Your name has been removed from every account tied to mine. The condo's sold. The revenue audit is done. There's nothing left to discuss." She looked at the folder like it was a weapon. But it was evidence. Not just of what she did, but of what I survived. I stepped back. She didn't follow. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. Just standing there watching the version of me she'd assumed would always stay finally disappear into the version who didn't need to explain himself anymore. I walked away. No drama. No glance over my shoulder. Just the sound of the street and my footsteps moving forward. I locked the door behind me when I got home. Twice. Once with the key, once with the truth.